Greetings and welcome to Essential Leadership Skills. Join our Director of Operations Glenn Daniels today as we discuss and learn about a very important and concerning topic with Dr. Geri Puleo. She is the creator of the Burnout During Organizational Change (BDOC) model, a research-based solution that defines the descent and recovery of workplace burnout. Her current project is focused on gender differences in workplace burnout. A frequent and popular keynote speaker, her TEDx Talk on burnout versus PTSD, more similar than you think, has been viewed over 500,000 times on YouTube.
This is a Touchstone Publishers presentation, your trusted source of leadership knowledge.
Well, as those of you who know me, you know what I'm always going to say to you. Good morning. No matter what time of day it is, no matter where we are, it's always going to be a good morning. I want to welcome with you a very special guest. This is one of those subjects that, as was talked about, Amy talked about in the introduction, it must be important and is critical. And tell us again, did we miss the pronunciation of your last name?
It's Puleo.
Puleo.
Would you like to hear a hint on how to pronounce Italian last names?
Yes.
All you have to do is throw your hand up. So Puleo. Try it.
That works, Puleo.
I told you it works every time. And it works with Italian food too, like, ravioli and all that kind of stuff.
Puleo. I like that. I like that. That works very well. It works very well. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this talk. In fact, I'll tell everybody right now, we're going to go in two segments here. Okay. We're going to pause for a second. All of a sudden, I picked up an echo. Still there? Still echo. That echo is gonna hang out there till we figure out how to stop it. And it gets worse and worse and worse. So this is the first time that I've ever had to restart one of these.
I'm sorry. It has to happen one time, but now it's over and done with. It won't happen again.
Yeah, and I'm not echoing anymore. Okay, good. I think. Okay. All right. Well, I got to get re-signed in. Oh, man. See, it's a good thing nobody's out there listening. I think we're going to have to change the equipment all the way around here.
Oh, wow.
It'll just take a second, I think.
Yeah,
but
you can just edit this thing out of the final broadcast.
As long as we don't get an echo and I'm frozen over here, I'm going to cause that echo. Shouldn't have happened. P. Okay. Let's just go PC screen only. We got a few minutes to edit out of this thing, don't we?
Yeah.
That's okay, though. It'll take care of it.
Well, that's what editing is for.
Not the way I like to do it, but okay. Control P. Let's go to extend. I think what was happening, I think it was picking it up twice. Okay, let's see how that, there's no echo there, but we didn't have an echo there. Okay, so.
Any echo when I'm speaking?
No, it was just me, and it will just keep on replaying. So just for me.
One thing,
yeah, sure.
You're freezing occasionally.
Really shouldn't be. I'm on a wired connection. Make sure everything's off, except for this. Oh, let's turn this off. That really should not be happening. It usually is the other party. So,
well, I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up.
Yeah, I'm glad you did, because I can just make sure that there's nothing else running in the background. That should prevent it. It should prevent it. Okay. All right, so 4:55 is where we'll cut to.
Okay, cool.
So we'll just stop right when that echo came up and then cut into here.
Cool.
And we'll just go, hey, Dr. Geri Puleo, welcome. For those of you who missed the excitement of the first part, I learned how to pronounce Italian food and Italian last names. I love it, Puleo. Oh, there you go. So I appreciate you coming and hanging out with us. I do think, although we have a great conversation coming up, we've already decided that we need to do this 2 times. Okay. Because
Thank you.
I just overwhelmed by your TED Talk. So we're going to focus on that this time. And then everybody, as you go through the process, you're going to see why we're going to go to a second episode with this one. But before we really get deep and down into it, I want to ask you a quick question.
Sure.
So tell us about what is unique or powerful about you or your TEDx or your organization. What's unique or powerful that most people kind of maybe need to be aware of?
Well, one of the things that's interesting is I have my PhD, but I'm not a psychologist. My PhD is in management. So I'm a business professional. And most of the research that's out there on burnout focuses just on the individual. If you're burned out, here are some tricks or hacks or secrets that you can use to learn how to manage your stress better. That's important. I agree with that. However, what I found in my original research that led to the BDOC model, or Burnout During Organizational Change model, what I found is that there's 10 ways that organizations burn out employees. And my mission is to eradicate workplace burnout. I want it gone in the US. I want it gone all around the world, because it is a very debilitating experience. It affects people physically, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and even spiritually. So my feeling is that the way to eradicate workplace burnout is to go to the source. Let's look at what's going on in organizations and make those changes so that employees are more committed, they're more engaged, and they're less likely to burn out. And it becomes a win-win-win for the organization, for the employee, and for the client. So that, I think, is probably the thing that's most unique about me, is my approach is a little bit different.
Well, your approach is a little bit different. You're research-backed. You do tons of research to make sure that this all works for you.
Yeah.
Also notice, as you said, win-win, but it's also kind of a 3-way win. The
win-win-win, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The employee wins, but there's also the community, the profitability, the longevity of the company wins.
Exactly.
So I think that's powerful. Before we get into this a little bit, everybody kind of likes to hear other people's backstories about this and how this happened. How did you, well, let me ask it this way. What was it like, the journey to getting on the stage? From the time you said, okay, I want to talk about this, what was that journey like?
To get up onto the TEDx stage?
Yeah, tell us about, was there anything that stuck on your mind that was funny or hard or?
Well, the reason I'm laughing is my story is a little bit different from other TEDx speakers. I had a friend of mine who was a professor at a university, and they were going to be promoting and sponsoring this TEDx talk. I knew nothing about it, but I had, 10, 15, 20 years of speaking in keynotes and corporate training, and even teaching in classrooms. So I was a skilled speaker. And it was probably about 2 weeks or 10 days before the TEDx was going to occur. And they said, "Is there any way you can speak?" And I said, "Sure, okay." And that's when I pulled everything together. And it was really this 22 minute TEDx talk was the culmination of all the years that I had spent conducting the research for my PhD that resulted in a dissertation that was over 400 pages. Okay. And kind of whittling that down into a small number of slides and that fit within the time frame. So my journey was a little bit different than most people's, and then of course it was published on YouTube, and as you said in the intro, it's received a lot of views and a lot of positive comments, which it makes me feel good that it's resonating. But it's also disturbing to me because it shows how burned out people, and they're just searching for some way to overcome their burnout. So
Well,
hopefully it helps.
that's, kind of a unique journey for two reasons, by the way. 18 minutes is usually the limit.
Yeah.
So people should understand why we're going 20 minutes, because you're just talking about an ideal. You did not get the opportunity to go in depth. So
Yeah.
that's why we're going 2 episodes.
Cool.
But for them to even allow you to have 2 extra minutes, that's really unique, which says how much your message was resonating out there. It's worth it. Underneath, it's scrolling so everybody can see the URL, so they can go look at it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And what's also unique about your journey, most people have to paper a wall of rejection notices before they get one.
Yeah.
So most speakers, so you just watched it, but that's, excuse me, also testament to the power of the subject. Power of the subject. This was a subject that I just was kind of blown away by all the way through it, because I was kind of surprised about how many people are getting burnout, and how it actually comes about. And then you mentioned this, so I'm going to dive into this a little bit, but you mentioned this,
Sure.
that there's personalities that are suspect to burnout.
Yeah. Yeah. There are certain personality types. And let me preface this by saying that before I created the BDOC model, I created something called the Burnout Triumvirate, which says that there's 3 things that have to occur for someone to burn out. One is certain personality traits that make you more susceptible. Second are those organizational factors or organizational stressors or the environment that contributes to it. And then third are the physical manifestations of burnout. And it's usually when people get the physical manifestations that they say, oh, something's not right here. Maybe I need to really recover from this burnout or try to do something about it. But what I found is, in my most recent research on gender differences in burnout, I found 2 personality traits that really seem to go hand in hand. One is the overachiever. That's the type of person who pushes way too long, pushes way too hard, tends to be very unrealistic, and excellence is not good enough. Sometimes there's perfectionism that comes right along with that. And as we all know, there is no such thing as perfection, because what's perfect to me may not be perfect to you. And then the other thing is the people pleaser. That seems to be the other personality trait that is more susceptible to burnout. People pleasers can't say no, but they can say no to things for different reasons than the overachiever cannot say no. The overachiever can't say no because they're so driven. The people pleaser can't say no because they're afraid of hurting somebody else's feelings. And what I found in my research is when you have that combination of overachiever with people pleaser, the likelihood of you burning out goes through the ceiling. And the burnouts tend to be really, really extreme.
So when I was listening to this and looking at those 2 different personality types, on the base, those 2 personality types almost feel like they're looking exterior for, looking outside of themselves for approval, looking outside themselves to pick themselves up. And when you're doing that, if I'm understanding your research correctly, that's what leads to burnout. You're looking outside for your success.
Exactly, because you're looking outside in terms of what you should be doing, in terms of validating what it is that you've done. And you tend to ignore your body. You tend to ignore, those gut feelings or instincts, because everything is externally directed. And I think it's one of the reasons why what I found in interviewing all of these people who have burned out is that their recovery often was characterized by learning how to say no, which led to creating and then maintaining boundaries. Because people pleasers and overachievers have a real tough time even setting up boundaries. So they tend to do whatever anybody else wants them to do.
Yep, and I hate to say guilty, but that's okay. That's the way it is. I mean, and it's good to have that called out. But what was really kind of shocking to me, and I'm going to ask you to stand your ground and explain this to me, because
this is going to be good. Okay.
I just got to toss this out. My organization would not be guilty of any of these 10 factors of burnout that you have talked about.
Okay.
And I'm sure there's 1,000 other people out there saying, no, my organization is not responsible for your burnout. But the truth of the matter, it is. Can you talk about the 10 organizational factors that contribute to burnout?
Well, it's interesting because this hasn't been talked about too much in the research. Because again, a lot of the research on burnout is done by psychologists, so they may look at, dynamics within the organization, but they tend to focus on the individual.
Right.
And do you want me to go through the top 10 list?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. And mind you, when I did this research, I'm a qualitative researcher. I use grounded theory. So what that involves is two what they call grand tour questions, and there's no hypotheses. And it's just interviewing people and then coding their responses until you see certain trends. And when the trends start repeating themselves, then you realize that you've got a valid theory. Now, that's a very, very simplistic way of describing it. It's much more complicated than that, but to give you an idea.
Yeah.
So the reason I bring that up is because these top 10 organizational factors that contribute to burnout, I did not have a list coming into it. I just wanted to know what caused them to burn out.
Right.
And these factors started emerging. Now, number 10 on the top 10 list.
Okay.
I feel like David Letterman here. I think I need to grow a beard or something.
I don't think I like the new look on you. About the beard.
But a number 10 was a company that lacks vision or direction.
Uh-oh.
And that's one of those things that companies say, oh, we have strategic goals. We know where we're going. But most of the organization doesn't. Or they're following a lot of different paths that aren't aligned with that vision or direction. I was working with a client once, and I asked them, it was a small nonprofit, and I asked them, because they had really downsized and they had all these like work activities that needed to be done. And I said, okay, what I want you to do is create a chart, strategic goals, and then every project and every report has to go into whatever those goals are, into those buckets. They could not do it. Couldn't do it. It was like, well, we do this because we always have. Why? What can we get rid of? Do we really still need this? And I'm sure you're familiar with this, Glenn, as are many people who will be watching or listening to this. How many of us get reports in email and they're filed away and they're never looked at? Or in the old days, it was you get the report and it went into the circular file to be thrown away.
Or the spam file, yeah.
Exactly. So no vision or direction was number 10. Number 9 was unethical or illegal requests. Now, this is getting into values. This is getting into the ethics and integrity of organizations. Based on various lawsuits and things like that, many companies have a statement of ethics, and they look for integrity, but what they have on paper sometimes doesn't match what's actually going on in the organization. Let me give you one example, and I had mentioned this in my TED Talk, or my TEDx Talk, excuse me. I was interviewing an executive director of a nonprofit, and she had burned out about 20 months prior. And she was so distraught when she was talking about this because the CFO had modified and significantly changed and removed pages in the financial report that was going to the IRS. She had already signed off on it. She was terrified because the numbers were changed after she signed off on it, and it was going to be her head on the chopping block.
Of course, yeah.
And she was the participant who had to stop the interview, went to the restroom, came back and said, look at me, I'm shaking. It's like it just happened. It's like PTSD. And that's what triggered this, maybe there are similarities between it. But those unethical or illegal requests. Some of the recent participants I've spoken with were told, we're going to do a major downsizing, but you can't tell anybody on your team. And they felt horrible with that. So those types of things build the stress. Number 8 is poor communication. It's not talking at someone. It's having a two-way dialogue where you ask questions and you listen for a response. It's active listening. I was doing a workshop for an HR group, and there was a guy who was there, and he said, I've listened to 64 of your slides right now, and you haven't specifically talked about communication to avoid burnout. And I said, well, yeah, I did. I just didn't use the word communication. I used participative management and things like that. And he said, we never had any problem. We always communicated with our employees. And I said, that's wonderful. We sent out a newsletter. I said, okay, that's a one-way communication. It's a monologue. It's not a dialogue. And he said, and he got a little bit miffed. And he said, but you know what gets me the angriest is if what we tell these employees to do, if we ask them what to do, they'd come up with the same thing. But yet when we tell them to do it, they don't want to do it. I said, it's because you're not communicating. It's not a two-way dialogue. If you ask them for their input, because they've given you this feedback, they're more invested in it.
And they're more likely to be productive and follow through with it.
Exactly. And he looked at me and went, oh, so we're not really communicating with them, are we? I said, no, it's one way. So it's that communication. And in the recent research, what's interesting is many of the women, because I just finished interviewing the women for the gender differences in burnout, many of the women told me that they had their manager to whom they reported changed as much as 6 times over a 18-month to 2-year period. So their managers never talked to them one-on-one. Their managers didn't even know them. So perhaps if managers communicate and engage in dialogue with employees, they'll be able to spot those warning signs or those stressors.
And to be honest with you, I'm surprised communication is that low on the list.
Exactly.
Exactly. Much higher. So I'm scared to hear what is next.
Well, number 7 is the one that surprised me the most, whereas number 9, the unethical or illegal requests, upset me the most.
Yeah.
What surprised me the most is that number 7 is work overload. That's pretty low on the list in terms of a stressor, because many people say, well, the reason I burned out is I just had too much work to do. Or a manager will say, well, the reason why you burned out is, you could have too much on your plate. But work overload was number 7. And what I found is a lot of these people were the high achievers. I'm not going to call them overachievers because I hadn't really been exploring overachievement when I did the original BDoc research. But they were high achievers and they wanted to do really well and they loved their jobs. So that may be one of the reasons why the work overload was lower on this list. When they mentioned work overload, it was an international travel schedule that they were traveling all over the globe and they were not taking any time to recover from the jet lag when they came back to work. So that a lot of times was in there. Now, number 6 is going to fly in the face of what most business schools say to focus on. Overemphasizing the return on investment was more stressful to employees who burned out than the work overload. And if you think about it, it kind of goes back with that communication. It's like you've made me a number on a spreadsheet. You don't see me as a person anymore. When we were in a manufacturing age, it was kind of easy. If Joe keeled over on the assembly line, move the dead body, put Tom in his place, and things just kept right on going, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're in an information age now. We're in a service paradigm. And even if you're in manufacturing, there's a very strong service component to whatever it is that you're doing. And when you're constantly overemphasizing the numbers or the return on the investment, it tends to belittle people's feelings, and they feel like they've been dehumanized, and that leads to their stress. Number 5, we're
well, before that, I got to tell you, number 6 also, that was one that kind of caught me a little bit. Might have been higher, but go ahead with number 5.
Okay. Well, you know what it is? I think that a lot of employees now, there's some greater transparency in terms of the numbers that a company relies on in terms of its metrics and its financial status and things like that. So that might be why it was lower. But it wasn't the return on the investment it bothered them. It's when that was overemphasized as opposed to what's going on in the workplace, in the people.
Yeah.
Then we get into the top 5 now, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Number 5 was a lack of resources. So think about it. If you compare that to number 7, that was the work overload. If you have a lot of work to do, but you have the proper resources to get it done, you'll normally put forth the effort, right? The other thing to look at is the resources could be financial. It could be tech. Are you giving the employees the tech that they need to do their jobs, or are they involved with old software that takes 5 steps to do something the new software could do in 1 step? And it's also the lack of human resources, the people. As you know, Glenn, many organizations are cutting things down to the bone. Employees have been laid off. They're thinking, do we really need to bring them back? But the problem is that many employees are doing the job, not just their jobs, but also the jobs of other employees. So they basically are doing 2 jobs instead of 1. I interviewed a woman recently. She had a really severe burnout. She was a director of one department. The director of another department, I think he resigned. They didn't have a replacement. They said, would you be the interim director? She was an interim director plus director of her own department for, I think it was like a year and a half, 2 full-time high-level jobs. And she didn't have the resources to hire or do any of the other things. So I think that made it, the burnout, much more severe.
Yeah, that would actually. They really would.
Yeah, it's well, and a lot of employees are complaining about that. When COVID hit and people were working from home, many employees were complaining that everything has changed. I don't have a private office. My Wi-Fi is not as powerful as what I need. How are you going to help me to do my work? And I think the companies whose leaders recognize that problem and tried to do something to help them are probably going to come out of this pandemic with better relationships with their employees rather than the employers who said, figure it out and be done with it.
Yeah, you have to remember that. Yeah.
Number 4.
Okay.
Number 4 is politics or sabotage. And yeah, that's a bad one. That's a bad one.
I can see that one being there because it is a very bad one.
Yeah, because you feel very dehumanized. You don't know whom you can trust. You don't know whom you can talk to. And you're always looking over your shoulder in terms of what is going on here. What needs to be done. Think of sabotage as you worked really hard on a project, you told a coworker, and then they came in and took credit for it. You see this with a lot of what I consider to be unethical managers whose employees or their teams do all the hard work, but then they take all the glory. I'm sure you've heard the old adage of you look out the window when things are going well to your team, but you look in the mirror at yourself when things are going badly with your team. Yeah.
Wow.
So the politics or sabotage was a big one. And really, if you've got a workplace culture that is characterized by that kind of cutthroat, work hard, play hard, win, lose, zero-sum mentality, you're creating an environment which is more conducive to burnout.
Yeah, you are.
So let me ask you a question. Those are the 7 of them. And because the top 3 kind of all go together, I'll get into them in a minute. What do you think of those 7? I'm just curious.
My gut feeling was at the time, communication is still number 1.
Okay.
Because if you're not communicating in a way that people need to hear and understand, that creates stress. And if you're hitting the job environment in a stressful way, then it's, well, no, I'm going to take that back. Communication is number 2. But because communication is so key and so critical to people, and you got to communicate the way that other person will understand it and feel comfortable. Because you still got to hold them accountable. All these things.
Exactly. And they need to know what you expect of them.
Exactly.
I mean, that when I've talked to some employers, and they're like, yeah, we haven't done a performance review in over a year.
Well, no wonder you're stagnant in your growth.
Yeah, exactly. So when we talk about the top three, they all kind of come together. Number three, and these are dealing with really the soft, squishy, emotional human needs that all employees have in the workplace. Number three is negative coworkers. Those coworkers who are the naysayers, who hate their jobs, that they found very difficult. I think it was it the Hawthorne effect, where they did some studies, and it was like a team-based project. And one person came in and was really gung-ho to do very well, but all the other members in the team didn't want to do it. Well, eventually the person who was so gung-ho had to change in order to fit in, with the group. It kind of, I've said many times that companies are like high school experiences on steroids. There's the in group, there's the out group, there's the jocks or the athletes, there's the smart ones, there's the nerds, there's the geeks, there's the party people. And it's still, I think, like that, which is why corporate culture, which cannot be defined, you can put everything you want in writing about this is what our culture is, this is our mission, this is our vision, this is our value statement. You can put all that stuff in there, but it's what really happens in the workplace that is the real culture. And if you have a lot of negativity, that can be difficult. What I found, though, a lot of times the employees are negative because of this background of very poor leadership and management within the organization, that they don't feel respected, that they feel overwhelmed. So negative coworkers can definitely influence somebody's burnout. Because think about it, if you're feeling stressed out and there's no one you can talk to at work, you're isolated. And that isolation can be very debilitating. I think it's why the stress levels and burnout have been on the rise during the shutdown with the pandemic, because people were not engaging with other people. I mean, Zoom is great, but it's, that's two-dimensional. It's very different when you see somebody three-dimensional,
Yeah, it is. It really is. It is. Yeah. We crave that touch, that eye-to-eye contact. Yep. Absolutely it is. So I do have to wonder, though, because of the way most of us were working from home, that didn't relieve stress?
That it can relieve stress?
Then it did not relieve stress.
It didn't relieve. Well, you know why? There was no transition period in the morning and at night. I remember when COVID first hit, I wrote an article and I said, I'm hoping that people who were stressed out before COVID will take that, let's call it an hour when they commuted to and from work, to take time for themselves, to kind of regroup and recenter. But that's not what happened, because these employees were not taught how to work from home. And if you think about the people pleaser and the overachiever, who is very externally motivated, they didn't have the internal locus of control to put those boundaries in. Many people worked longer hours when they were in shutdown. The fact that they could do it in their jammies while they were working, so what? They were working another few hours a week. There's been some research on that. Unfortunately, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was a pretty significant increase in the number of hours worked at home, during the pandemic, because, a lot of people were like, oh, I heard my email go off. You know what that means? I have to answer it immediately. And then there's also the organizational leaders during the pandemic, as well as during, shall we call it, business as usual, that they'd send an email on a Saturday. And then they'd send another email on Sunday just to make sure that the employee got the email on Saturday. And I think part of the problem is that the employee, the manager would say, I don't have to, you don't have to answer it right away. But the employee's like, but you reminded me, and it was on the weekend, it was outside of work hours. Why couldn't you have just waited?
Wow.
Yeah. And then we get to number 2. And this is the one, this is what is so heartbreaking with many people who burn out. They feel that their organization doesn't care about them. A lack of organizational caring. And there were many people whom I've interviewed that said, I took a sabbatical because I had to try to get better. No one even called me. My boss never checked anything, never checked to see how I was doing. They felt, again, dehumanized. And like, I've been killing myself for this organization, but you don't care. Why did I do all of this?
Wow.
And and when these people, and these were men and women who told these stories, it was heartbreaking because it was very, very raw, and it caused them to change.
I can imagine that would be very much heartbreaking, because you got to get to the point that you're broken first.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
Yes. And then all this leads up to the number one way that organizations burn out employees: poor leadership. And if you look at all of the other 9 organizational stressors, they all are leading up to or are components of poor leadership. The leader who focuses more on the dollars rather than on the people. The leader who doesn't say thank you and show that they care. The leader who talks at an employee, or worse, screams and rants and raves at them. The leader who just keeps piling on work on an employee and never asking what they can do. And I did some research with a gentleman who's at a senior level in cybersecurity. And we did a study of cybersecurity professionals because the rate of burnout in that field is through the roof. And Frank Angiolelli he's a very techie guy, obviously, if he's in cybersecurity. And we figured out, we were doing all these pivot charts and everything else to try to figure out what the tipping point is, because these people traditionally work very, very long hours, but that wasn't the cause of their burnout. They had major challenges and issues, but that wasn't it. And when we started really looking at the data and analyzing it, it was so funny because he was sharing a screen with me, and we both just started yelling and woo-hooing it because it was poor leadership. They could handle anything else. They could go above and beyond. But if they didn't have a good leader who cared about them, that was the tipping point. And they left.
Wow.
And that's something that I think people need to realize. If organizations are like, it's burnout's an individual's maladaptive response to stress. They need to realize that burned out employees are often the high achievers and the star performers. And when they burn out, they leave. Gone, period, end of story. And I think a lot of employers are surprised by that, but they leave. And I'm talking about not just 50% or 60%. I think it's in the people I've interviewed, well, with the women in burnout, 100% of them left. And I think it was 96% of the people I interviewed in my first research. So they're going to leave. And that goes right back into, what you talk about with the importance of good, solid leadership.
Yeah. And first thing we have to discover what we mean, what skill, technique, what are we defining, which we're defining why people have burnout.
Yeah.
Then we got to have great leaders to take care of that. I agree with that. And it concerns me a lot. Poor leadership creates burnout. What we're saying is that it's me, the leader, that can create burnout.
And one thing about the leaders, though, they're just as fried as their employees are. And who's helping them? So it's just this trickle down effect. It's like a quagmire of all these stressed out employees who don't even know how to handle their own burnout, let alone even acknowledge it in somebody else. And and that, if I can add this, Herbert Freudenberger was the Freudian psychoanalyst who identified the burnout phenomenon, and he said it was a 12 or 13 stage process until you're totally burnt out. And by the way, do you want to know why he called it burnout?
Yes.
Because he was a Freudian psychoanalyst. The people who he treated who were burned out, or what he called burned out, were dead inside, like the shell of a burned out building, where there might be the outside, but there's nothing left inside. And I think that organizational leaders have to recognize that, based on Freudenberger's model, an individual is halfway down the the descent into burnout before anybody around him even says, gee, something seems to be a little wrong. So, and that's scary. That's scary.
It's way too late.
Yeah.
Well, as I told you, ladies and gentlemen, critical conversation. Critical conversation. Very much critical. We have to have this. You know what concerns me? And I put it up on the screen. Poor leadership creates burnout. And you just got to label it the way that it does. That's my number one.
Let me say one thing. Remember, I'm a researcher, so is there a causal link between it? Well, it's tough to find a cause exactly, but let's just say it is highly correlated. Highly correlated. I mean, look how much research had to be done before they found a causal link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer. Before they got that really solid data, it would be correlated. I'm so to say that it causes it. I may not be able to prove it right now, but if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Probably is. Yeah. Probably is. Wow. So that's a powerful list.
Yeah.
Powerful
important.
List.
It's important.
To start identifying that in your own leadership style and in your own company.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be your company. Look at your leadership style. You're doing any of those 10 inside your leadership style.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that's great about the list is if you flip each one of it to its opposite, you end up getting a 10-step process that can build employee engagement and resiliency. So let me give you an example. Let's start with the number one, the poor leadership. If you change that to servant leadership that's built on trust and autonomy, and basically treats employees like adults, that can turn the tide. If you look at a lack of organizational caring, the company has to provide tangible proof that they care and that they support the employees. And it's the tangible proof that the employees need, not what the leaders think will prove that they actually care. And that goes back into communication. Instead of a one-way monologue, make it a two-way dialogue. What is it that you need? What is it that you want? How can we help you? But I will warn you and all of the viewers and listeners that if there has been mistrust built in the organization, it's not going to change overnight because of that history. So you have to be very, very patient and very consistent to prove to them, something, we're making changes and we're going to sustain those changes.
Okay, wow. I want to be respectful of our time, but I just have two more questions I want to ask you about this.
Sure.
Okay. Recovery is not over the weekend. Why? I
Nope.
mean, can't you sleep over the weekend and get your strength back, energy back? But
No.
and you had a very good reason as to why. Please share that with us.
Well, if you can sleep it off in a weekend, you're not burned out. You're just tired. If let's say you're doing some home improvements and you've really worked very hard on the weekend and your muscles are sore and you're exhausted when you go to bed at night, but you sleep well, you take it easy the next day, you feel better. That's a physical exhaustion. The problem with burnout is that it's a physical, mental, emotional, psychological, and even spiritual exhaustion. And I think something else is important. People don't burn out overnight. What I found so fascinating with some of the women that I just researched is I thought I was going to be smart. So I had a pre-interview survey about the symptoms and how long their burnout was, because I thought it would be easier to streamline the interview process, right? I wouldn't have to ask it. Well, I remember I had one participant who said her burnout lasted 3 months. And I remember reading that survey going, ain't no way. Ain't no way. That just flies in the face of everything. And when I interviewed her and I said, you said you were burned out for 3 months. And she said, did I say that? I said, yeah. She said, well, now that we've been talking about it, because I haven't really talked about this with anybody.
Oh, isn't that key?
Yes. She said, really, it took about a year at least for me to get that fried. And what I discovered when I was doing the research for the BDOC model is that the recovery took about 2 years to recover. It didn't happen overnight. So you're not going to be cured from it overnight. In my new research, I found women, I had to start asking the question, have you recovered? And the majority of the women said no. Some of them were 5 years out from when they left that burnout producing situation. 5 years. And in the BDOC model, what I discovered is that they could start the recovery, but during that 2-year period of recovery, something could happen that triggers this memory. This is why it's like PTSD. And they can get back into, I defined 3 stages prior to burnout, which would be frustration, anger, apathy, and then a full-blown burnout. When you're recovering, something can boomerang you right back into any of those stages or a full-blown burnout. And that's what I call residual burnout. And I think it's one of the reasons why employee engagement has decreased, because people are burned out. They leave the stressful work situation, go someplace else, bam, same type of thing happens, they burn out again. So they just keep getting more and more cynical about work in general. But it takes a while. What I'm also finding, because in the original BDOC model, I focused on what causes and maintains employee burnout. In this new research on gender differences, I'm really diving into how do you recover from it? Not only what contributed to it, but how did you recover? And the participants validated what I found in BDOC, which is you have to leave either psychologically or physically that stressful situation. Psychological withdrawal would be presenteeism, where you're still going to work, but you're doing the bare minimum.
Yeah, just
nothing more. You're just kind of coasting. The physical withdrawal would be leaving the job, either of your own volition or through being terminated or fired or laid off. But then once you leave it, then you have to take the time for self-reflection. And if you consider there's personality traits, there's things that went on with the organization, that's going to take some real gut-wrenching work in order to find out what your burnout triggers are, how to overcome your burnout and what works for you, and then set yourself up so that you don't burn out again. Now, in my BDOC model, I identified recovery as, this is so hoity-toity, a revised psychological contract with work. which is nothing more than, I'll do this for you, employer, but I expect you to do this for me. Okay. What I found, and what I'm so elated about, and I know that's a very strong word, but I really mean it, is that the women whom I've interviewed, because remember, I haven't interviewed the men yet.
Right.
The women whom I interviewed that really did recover went above and beyond that. They basically were striving towards Maslow's self-actualization. Now, that is like mind-blowing to me, because they've identified who they are, what they want, what they're willing to sacrifice. They set up and maintain boundaries. They have a stronger sense of self-worth. They practice daily self-care, that they don't sacrifice themselves for everybody else. And
What a
as a
wonderful
result, they're
connection.
happier. Yeah. I mean, when I discovered that, I thought, but to tell someone that, yes, I can help you recover from burnout and you'll have a revised psychological contract with work, that's not that exciting.
No, but it is exciting to be self-actualized.
Exactly. And it takes time. And you have to be
Wow.
patient with yourself.
I got to tell you something.
Yeah.
We're going to need a third.
Hey, I told you I can talk about this all day long,
And
because
we
I think it's
should.
important, and I think there is hope for people.
In
And
your TED Talk, you wrap it up kind of when you're talking about, okay, well, here's why you should be paying attention to this. And if you're a leader and you can't see why you're paying attention, why not paying attention to this is devastating, why you should pay attention to it, it's absolutely over the top.
Yeah.
We still got, there's a little bit more of the recovery model I think we need to talk about. We're going to talk about the physical symptoms.
Yep.
And I think what was unique and brave on your part, we have to really talk about burnout and PTSD.
Yeah.
You had the nerve to say they were the same. So you
Yeah.
got to explain that. So that's my tease to get everybody to come back to the next episode.
Sounds good.
But I do want to ask you, because you look at this from both viewpoints, from the viewpoint of the organization and the viewpoint of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
What can an individual do with you right now to help them begin that recovery process, or help them identify what's going on?
Well, let me preface this by saying that there are no quick fix hacks.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in an age where everything is a hack. You don't have to go through the work, just do what I did and you'll recover.
No.
Or, you want to learn how to master social media, just do these 10 steps and everything will be peachy keen. Until you get started on those 10 steps and you realize, oh, this is involving a lot more than I thought it was going to be involving.
Yeah.
But I think what really needs, the first thing, and this is going to sound really weird, first thing you need to do is breathe. When you're stressed out, you breathe very shallowly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was doing a workshop with a yoga instructor, and we were talking about deep breathing. And I look, this is when we were still live, right? That it wasn't being done on Zoom or any other video platform. And I looked at the audience and I said, okay, everybody take a deep breath. And every one of them, their shoulders went up, their faces got all scrunched up, and they're real tight. I started laughing. And they looked at me like, why are you laughing at us? I said, because that's not deep breathing.
It's not deep breathing.
I said, breathe so that you feel your diaphragm, or that muscle in your belly, going down and out.
Mm-hmm.
When they did it, their whole demeanor changed. So those breathing techniques are really good. Secondly, Buddhists talk about monkey mind, which is where you have all these competing thoughts. And it's just chatter. Listen to it. And again, this sounds simplistic, but it works. When you hear the monkey mind going on, stop, breathe, and say, no. No. And it's not going to be like, oh my God, I've attained enlightenment and nirvana and everything's peachy keen. But it's that stopping. Take time for self-care.
Yes.
And that's what I found is that if you were a couch potato, for me to tell you to go out and walk a mile, you're not going to do it. You're going to hate it. But if you're more introspective to say, take some time for meditation or prayer or quiet reflection, you'll be able to do that. Similarly, if you were very athletic before, and what I found is when people burn out, their self-care goes right out the window. I mean, they're not eating right, they're not sleeping right, they're not exercising, they're not doing anything. But if you exercised before, start getting back into the habit of exercise. Now, what I found is, so there's like these two pathways, and what I found is that eventually there's a crossover. So the people who were doing the meditating eventually felt better and said, I'm going to start taking care of my body now. The people who started with the exercise and the diet and taking care of their body eventually got to the point where they're like, okay, I got to take care of myself psychologically and spiritually. And eventually they did both. Because I know that some people, when they've been asked to meditate when they're burned out, the fact that they couldn't calm the monkey mind for 5 seconds or just to sit quietly for 60 seconds added to their stress levels. Like,
so I fit into that.
Yeah. I've always been a meditator. I've meditated for years, and I tend to do chakra meditations. And it's very important to me. It keeps that balance going. And I think that's what really happens. I interviewed several women who said burnout was really a blessing in disguise for them. They were going down a path where they were killing themselves. They weren't happy. Their friendships had gone to the wayside, and they were killing themselves. And burnout was like the universe slapping them on the side of the head and saying, okay, wake up. We've tried all this other stuff. We have to do something dramatic so that you start recognizing your own value and taking care of yourself. And that led for them to be able to say no, as well as create and maintain those boundaries.
I love it. I love it. Now, this is all in your e-learning course too?
Yeah, a lot of this is, I have a course on how to manage stress and avoid burnout. And I believe it's 10 modules. And it talks about, there's a lot involved with it. Like the module isn't just one video. There's several videos in there. There's articles. And there's audio downloads of all the articles. So you can take it with you, because I know some people can't just sit there and stare at a computer screen or stare at their smartphones, And it's all in that course.
Okay, so perfect. And it's been scrolling down the bottom of the screen there for us for a little bit. So everybody should have links to that. When we do our second and third part, see, I already volunteered you for the third part.
Well, I already said I'd be happy to do it.
We'll talk about your business application. What do you do for companies? That's critical, but we'll start off this one just talking about that. We will dig deep on a couple other things.
Sure.
We have to get a hold of this because stress kills.
Yep.
Burnout kills, and we know PTSD kills.
Yeah.
So let's get that together. I'm going to forego a couple of my traditional last questions because we have more to talk about.
Exactly.
I have to absolutely say thank you very, very much for your time, your generous time.
Oh, my pleasure.
We really are going to be able to make a difference and really be able to help folks. I think leaders, you need to hear this. I was counting. We probably had about 5 to 10 writable moments.
Oh, great.
And writable moments to me means something that you said, wait a minute, I'm stopping this and I'm writing this down. And I bet you there's at least 5. And I have 14 in mind. So I was trying to make little marks at the time. So I have 14 in mind right now. And we got 2 more episodes to go through. So,
my pleasure. I appreciate the platform, and I appreciate the fact that you believe in the importance of this. That's really important. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We will be back together. I'll let everybody know pretty soon when we'll be back together.
Sounds good.
Everybody enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for connecting with us here at Touchstone Publishers. Please join our group Essential Leadership Skills and share your leadership knowledge with us all.